Welcome to another episode of The Local Dive. This is Alex Scott, joined by Dean and Sarah. There it is. Ashlyn Portero. Oh, you already opened yours.
Yeah, I don't have one. Sorry.
And then producer Biceps Jacob Baldry.
Hello. There you go, Ashlyn. There's my Coke.
Thank you.
I mean, unsweet tea. Sorry, Mom.
Well, it's just ice now, whatever it was, so you're safe. It's in the past.
There are so many cups on this table.
I know, there really are.
We're very hydrated.
And, of course, Jacob had a protein shake.
Well, hey.
Of
course.
Yeah.
You don't look like that drinking Diet Coke.
True, totally true.
All right. Well, today we're going to be continuing the conversation we started last week. We talked about casual Christianity. We're excited today to talk about cultural Christianity. At least one of us here is an expert on it.
Dude, you act like you wrote the book on it.
Wait.
Sorry, I've always wanted to say that. I'm such a jerk. Sorry. Canceling myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend the rest of this time just like humbling you.
Is this like is there like around the horn? Can I mute you for a second? But before we do, today since we're talking about cultural Christianity, we thought we would just talk about things in culture that we want to punch. So this is our punch list of current culture.
And by punch list, we don't mean like a bucket list. We mean like actually close fist.
Yes,
yeah.
Like you literally want to close your fist and punch them. Like this is the list of things or people you would punch if you could.
I'll start.
In the name of the Lord.
I want Ashlyn to start because mine is definitely controversial. My first one.
Shocker. Mine are not controversial at all, but I kind of missed the cultural memo, so I'm going to loosely tie them into different cultures.
It's just a punch list.
Mine are just like things that currently annoy me.
Fine.
Okay.
That.
Both of them do have to do with driving, so we will say driving culture.
Everything is culture.
Yeah,
this one I think it's about buckle up.
No, it's not.
Okay,
this
sorry.
is a different one. Yeah, this is a different one. So people who drive close to runners and bikers on the road, even if you think, because that's like a controversial topic, even if you think that that person should be on the sidewalk and not on the road, it does not give you right to like basically run them off the road to prove your point.
So, are you speaking from experience?
Yes.
Okay.
Like within the last 12 hours.
Okay.
On Armistead Road, white CRV. I'm just white
License
male over 60. Let me just go ahead and put you on blast. Yeah, I'm like, it's okay if you need to gesture for me to be over on the sidewalk, even though like that's bad for your legs and on and on and on. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run on the road. But like, or like if you're a biker, it's like, yes, it is kind of like inconvenient to have to slow down and go around someone or whatever. But like, that's better than like trying to like hit
Kill
somebody.
someone,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that person is definitely on my punch list.
Do you run against the
Yes,
flow
I
of
run
traffic?
against the flow
Yeah.
of traffic.
That's good. So if somebody's going to kill you, at least you'll see it coming.
That's true. And I have literally had to jump up onto a sidewalk before to avoid being hit.
Yeah.
So yeah. But not, I don't think on purpose. I think that person was just a really bad driver. just for the record. And then my second one related to driving culture. This is something that I inherited from my dad. When you're trying to turn across multiple lanes of traffic and one lane stops to let you across, I never go because the other lanes most likely do not stop. They keep going. So if you can visualize that in your head. So if you're sitting like in the middle of like, a multiple lane road going multiple directions.
Hypothetically, you're coming out of Trader Joe's.
Yes. Yeah. You're coming out of Trader Joe's,
Trying to turn
Tallahassee,
left
trying to turn
towards
left,
Thomasville.
Yeah. And if people are coming your way, if one lane of traffic stops, but the others don't, you're not going to go. But then the person who stops gets self-righteous about it and they start waving at you like, here I am, such a good human trying to let you across multiple lanes of traffic. And I'm like, no, because I can see what you don't see and I'm about to get T-boned by a car.
Totally. Yeah, that's a thing.
End rant.
That's good. No, that's good. All right. Here we go.
What you got?
I want to punch post your vaccine picture people.
Really?
I'm sorry. It is just like, so look at me, virtue signaling. I'm one of the good. It's just like, and I'm going to get the vaccine as soon as I'm eligible, I promise. But like, you ain't going to get a picture. I don't want to see I don't want to see your arm pulled up. And like, it's like, get out of here. Unless you got producer Jacob like guns. I mean, like, put your sleeve down.
I am going to video my entire vaccination.
Oh, my word.
And send it to you.
I just can't.
So no selfies of Dean and Sarah with the CDC vaccination card.
I love y'all. I roll my eyes so hard every time y'all post those pictures. It's just like,
Oh my
Well, it's
God.
encouraging others to go and get. No, it's not. I mean, like, come on. Like, I'm not going to get the vaccine because I saw like Alex post a picture of his bulgy biceps. Producer Jacob.
Well, I feel you just said I had bulgy biceps. I'm like, I don't care what happens the rest of the day. I'm good.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, that would be definitely probably my biggest one, and the second one is just Corona optics person. To where it's not really about being like careful with the virus. It's about like showing the fact that I'm on the right side and I wear a mask and you don't. The person that like wears a mask when they're like a million feet away from everybody else, and that type of thing. It's like, come on, I just can't do that. Like, you're making people that are trying to take the virus seriously more cynical because of your ridiculousness.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And you're not a CDC expert like you think you are because you read 3 articles. Like, breathe. I'm done.
Ashlyn,
We
do you have anything
are
to lighten the
hot
load?
today.
Do you have anything else, Ashlyn? Or are you
I already came out with
with
two
Okay.
hot takes, so
I don't know why. I don't have anything at the moment. I'm
you're
just
life
totally.
is good for Alex.
Yeah, no, I'm probably not. I just haven't, I haven't had anything lately that's like really revved me up and
Jacob, do you have a punch list?
made me want to punch anything.
Mine would probably be related to driving too. Just like people not using their blinkers. I don't know. I feel like that's a big cultural thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like,
Don't
lost.
drive behind me. I don't know. It's like, I guess there's a right time to use the blinker and not. Like, if you're like on the interstate and it's not like packed and like an immediate, like I need to signal, I'm not going to signal. But if like somebody's right behind me, I'll signal. But yeah, so you might want to punch me.
just, we all had to take driver's ed, just trying to retain some knowledge from it.
I don't know. I think it was my mom who would say this, but she'd go, I know GM installed a blinker on that car when it was built.
Pat Scott, what's up? Alex's mom.
It's like why? I mean, yeah. So my mom would be annoyed that I don't use my blinker all the time, but whatever.
She's from Detroit.
Yeah.
So they make car parts up there.
Well,
So she wants every
cars.
But 2 I meant. So she wants every part of the car to be utilized.
That's fair.
Is
yes.
what I meant.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, they make the whole car, but all right. Well,
I mean, Tokyo's better, but Sorry.
Now
I just announced all of Alex's people.
we're just wading into weird territory.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know. This has gotten really bad, but anyways, let's move on to the deep dive, talking about cultural Christianity. So last episode, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about casual Christianity, and I would encourage folks to go listen to that if you haven't. But Dean, since you literally wrote the book on it, how do we define cultural Christianity?
So cultural Christianity, I would say, and I grew up in this, and this is my context, and so so it's not really that I am a research expert. I'm more of an experienced, lived person on this, because I don't think it really is a category to be researched. It is more of
Social
a
research.
reality to understand, yeah. And it is someone who would claim to be a Christian, but their reason for believing they are Christians has nothing to do with what actually constitutes a saving faith in the Bible, which is why I called my book The Unsaved Christian.
So like last week we talked about casual Christians. They're legitimate believers. They just need to be discipled, generally speaking.
For them, I believe that. Now,
Yeah.
again, there's always exceptions,
Right.
but like that maybe we think they are, but they're not. But for the most part, I think they do have like the sprouting of faith, like from the seed that was planted in them. But there's just not. It's just not. It hasn't really matured at all.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Whereas a cultural Christian, there's no maturity and there's also no convictional.
There's no saving faith.
Faith, yeah. That's actually saving.
Because they're usually generic theists. Like they're not. They think they're Christians because they're not atheists, basically, or not agnostics, and they aren't Jewish or Muslim. So because of that, basically, they think they're Christians.
Christian.
Yeah.
Cool.
But notice when I talked about why they think they're Christians, notice I didn't even mention Jesus.
Right.
Because it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, it has to do with what they're not more than.
Yeah, just like a casual belief in God.
Yeah. And probably have some family, maybe kind of heritage or history of believers, kind of grandma, mom, dad, whatever it is.
And see themselves as good people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last week, and we talked about sort of like cultural Christianity, casual Christianity, the kind of the key emphasis and biggest barrier there being discipleship. It's evangelism for cultural Christianity. And one of the things that like I've heard you say, and I think this is in the book too, but you say basically like you have to get the cultural Christian lost to get them saved. And like where do we start with those conversations? How does that happen? How do we?
I think it has to. I think that's what makes it complicated. Is there is no clear starting point. So with an atheist, the clear starting point is unbelief, right? If someone's, let's say, Mormon, the starting point could be what Christianity teaches compared to what the Latter-day Saints teach, right kind of idea. So it's a clear starting point, right? There's comparison, there's contrast. With a cultural Christian, the hardest part about evangelizing them is they think they're fine. So you almost have to deconstruct their own self-righteousness. And by self-righteousness, I don't mean like in a Pharisee, legalistic, snooty, morally superior kind of way. I mean just they trust in themselves that they're fine. That's a hard nut to crack. I mean, you have to really work through that because they're right. They are good people by American standards. That's not what God judges by. So I really try to start with their view of God because lowercase g, generic, big guy upstairs, divine Santa Claus, grandpa in the sky kind of idea, then sinning against him doesn't really mean that much, right? But if the God of the Bible, capital G God, Yahweh, the God who's revealed himself as the great I am, if that's the God that you believe in, then that's going to change the game.
I would say too, starting with like what is their knowledge of the Bible, and I don't mean like that you like quiz somebody on
not a sword drill.
Right, exactly, like obscure passages in the Bible or something like that. But for the most part, a cultural Christian is going to be able to like cherry pick a few verses or know a few stories that they heard in Sunday school or in, their church that they went to, at Christmas and Easter or vacation Bible school or whatever it is. But the word of God doesn't dwell richly in them, and they're not rooted in the scriptures. And so I think that can come up, in conversation if you are a Christian and you just are talking about, if someone says, hey, what are you reading right now? Or if they're going through a time of struggle or suffering and you bring up, this passage of scripture is really comforting to me. Are you familiar with it? So when I say like asking kind of what their familiarity is, or if you're just having like a blatant conversation about faith, asking, what does it look like for you to, reading scriptures? Like, do you know your Bible, whatever? Or if you go to church with someone and they're occasionally there, talking about the sermon, just trying to get a gauge for that, because the more obviously that we're reading the scriptures, that sort of demands some kind of response from you if God is at work there. And so I think that can be another way just to sort of get an idea of where someone's at, is how important is the word of God to them.
Yeah, casual Christianity makes me a little upset. Not that I don't ever walk in it. I mean, but cultural Christianity is a different ballgame for me. It's more of a compassion. I push hard on it. I confront it strongly. But like I really see cultural Christians, as scriptures would say, as people who are sheep without a shepherd. I mean, I really see them as people who are lost and don't know Christ. So I don't want to kick them in the rear end and say, get it together. Instead, I want them to meet Jesus, the actual one who is the definition of what it means to be a Christian. Because
I would say telling them to get it together, they kind of already think they do, right? Like maybe they think, oh, I could be a little more, like I'm not quite as holy
into church or something like that.
I could be a little bit more serious about my faith or whatever. But in reality, like they're not serious about their faith at all, because it's just sort of something that like is another.
Yeah, a cultural Christian thinks the only difference between themselves and an actual Christian. In their mind, they don't think, oh, he's a Christian, I'm not. It's, oh, he's just really into religion.
Really into it, yeah.
She's just really religious. That's kind of the words they would use. And they think that
like a big Christian.
Yeah, I respect her. Like I feel judged by her sometimes. But I respect that a lot. And she's a person I go to if something bad happens. I'm gonna call her and him and go visit him, that kind of stuff. But like we're all Christians. It's just they're just really like he's the guy.
They really take it seriously.
He's the guy that gets asked to pray at dinner at Thanksgiving. Kind of thing.
So, like, for the cultural Christian, and obviously we all know some, what keeps them kind of grounding their identity in this generic theism Christian faith when it doesn't actually have any kind of meaningful impact on day-to-day life? Like,
well, in America it works, right? And probably a few other countries too. Like, it works. You can claim to be a Christian and have all the maybe personal feelings that come with that. You might not have cultural benefits very often anymore, except for maybe certain Bible Belt towns in the middle of the South somewhere. But but Russell Moore tells a story of his roommate in college was not a believer at all, and Moore would invite him to go to church, and he'd be like, "Man, that's not my thing," that kind of stuff. And then years later, he reached out to Russ and said, "Hey, can you recommend a church to me in Gulfport or Hattiesburg, wherever he lived at the time?" And Russ was like, "Holy cow, man! Like you're a believer now." He's like, "Oh no, man, I'm not. I'm just running for office." And you can't run for office in southern Mississippi on the coast and not be a Christian. Yeah. Very few places is that still true, right? Very, very few places. So it's not even the cultural benefit anymore. It's more of there's not only a stigma. Now, there is a stigma to being an atheist in a lot of places, just like a straight up atheist. Like no president of the United States has ever claimed to be an atheist, that type of thing. But I think it's easy to still maintain the personal feel goods about yourself, that you're religious, you're Christian, whatever that even means. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it will never be really challenged because you're probably not going to church. So there's no place for it to be challenged. If you do, oftentimes it's like mainline, with kind of non-gospel preaching on Mother's Day with the sermons about how to be a great mom or thank God for moms, that kind of, mom's the focus of the sermon, not the gospel or the service, not the gospel, not our sin, Christ's redemption. Or maybe you're like marginally Catholic and it's like you just kind of get back in the routine for a couple of weeks because it's time for your kid to get christened and you hadn't been since you got christened or not christened, but like first communion or that kind of stuff, So it's just easy to do and you can still kind of go through the motions of it and it not ever be challenged.
In terms of like, obviously that plays out certain in the South with like Dean, that story and that example specifically. And it's certainly not trending that way in most places now, but like, how does this look different, or does it look different for somebody like you mentioned, like a lapsed Catholic who just kind of claims it? Maybe they send their kid for their first baptism. Or is there any difference in cultural Christianity outside of the South versus other parts of the country, or like when we think about kind of Catholics or other mainline Protestants? How do we think about kind of non-Southern, non-evangelical cultural Christians?
Well, I think it's important to know that in most cities in America, the majority of people are not atheists. Doesn't mean they're Christians, as we're talking about how cultural Christianity is not Christian. But they're not as we would call like a Bible Belt cultural Christian, where they're pro, at least respectful, somewhat church in their life or some kind of Christian heritage. It's not that. It's just they're generic theists. Like they believe in God. Is it the God of the Bible? Most likely no for a lot of people. But it's that lowercase g God I talked about earlier. But that's the reality there. Like they still like celebrate Easter and they still celebrate Christmas, right? They might even have a manger scene as one of their decorations, but they do nothing in their life resembles anything of saving faith. They probably couldn't even articulate the gospel to you, but how it's still cultural Christianity is if you ask them, they might even say they're Christians, but not in a way of like, my grandma's the greatest Christian ever and she taught Sunday school at First Baptist Church, Montgomery for 50 years. It's not that. It's more just like, well, yeah, I mean, we're not like atheists. We're just, we're not that religious, but yeah, they almost equate it with being spiritual.
Okay. Yeah.
In a way.
It's sort of an identifier in the same way that they are other, whatever other labels they put on themselves. But it's like, yeah, of course I'm a Christian. I do these things.
Yeah. They see it that more as moral and just like not being an atheist. And they might be pro Darwinism and everything else under the sun, but still somehow they see themselves as not Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, like it's almost like that's the extremist position, and so the default position is this sort of cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
In terms of like the way that maybe heritage, kind of like thinking about it, well, of course I'm a Christian because my grandmother is or was or and sort of this idea that we can possess our own self-righteousness before the Lord. Like, how does that create barriers in confronting and dealing with cultural Christianity?
I would say definitely it gives you this false sense of security, that all of your faith and your salvation is wrapped up in, your kind of your family's like general vague allegiance to God, sort of what Dean was saying, where you sort of think yourselves as spiritual or as moral or something like that, but it's not rooted in Christ. And I think it's important to say salvation and ongoing faith, because a lot of times, we don't just think, well, I'm good because like my grandmother is saved, or because, I come from a Christian family. Like if someone says I've been a Christian all my life, and I get that a lot of people are saying like I was brought up in the church. I was, if you accepted Christ at a very young age, like that's very real.
Sure.
You might not have many memories where you did not know the name of Jesus and what a grace in your life. But if it more so rests in, thinking, why I come from a Christian family, so I'm good. And then also I have no further need to explore or understand what it means to be a Christian because I've like reached this, place of being good. Like that's where all of the, I think, danger comes in, is when we start to believe that. And I mean, just the verse or the scripture that comes like straight to my mind anytime I think about cultural Christianity is Matthew 3, when John the Baptist comes, proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah. And it says, Matthew 3 verses 7 through 10, he says, but when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, you brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruit in keeping with repentance. And so, we're talking about like your own faith, your own righteousness. And do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children for Abraham. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. And that just, I think that's a good kind of illustration of that.
I think about my family, and my entire life, it's always been a big deal that we're Italian. And Sarah's an Italian name, actually from Sicily. But I'm like not Italian at all. Like I'm like a fourth Italian, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm more other things than we never grew up talking about that. Like we were also like, I think I'm part German, part Swedish, and my paternal grandmother was adopted, and I don't know if I even know where her family's from. I'm not really, maybe England, I think. I'm not even really sure. So the whole point of that is we never growing up, we're like, oh, we're German. Like in Italian families at all, it's like really prideful to be, like it's a big deal to be Italian. Like my grandpa's like the great, if you were Italian, you were his favorite baseball player, his favorite football player, like always the Italian guy. Like our generation is not looking for the person that has whatever heritage, 3 generations ago someone had and rooting for them right in a game. So I've been told my entire life I'm Italian. Technically, I come from an Italian family way down the line, but I can't speak one Italian word. I think I can count to 10. My grandpa taught me when I was a kid. I have never been to Italy, right? Italian food I like, but it's not my favorite food. There's other things, and the kind I like is probably an Americanized version anyway, so I wouldn't know I've never been to Italy, but the whole point is like we still claim to be Italian. And again, you might say, well, technically you are because your grandfather's from there. Well, yeah, but like it's never been an actual, it's not a real reality of my life. Mm-hmm. But I claim it because it's heritage. So that analogy is broken a little bit in the fact that I technically do have Italian blood, but I had this identity that isn't really a part of me and really isn't a part of my life. So these people think they're Christians because their grandpa, was a deacon at First Baptist, or not even that. Oftentimes that's even an evangelical grandpa. They might think they are because their grandmother, just prayed,
Yeah.
Or they said a prayer before dinner at her house, or those kind of things, when really it's not real. They've never been to Italy. They can't speak any Italian. They eat an Americanized version of the food. It has nothing to do with anything of that. And I think that's just kind of comes to my mind when I think about that.
Yes, I mean there's no Bible intake. There's no kind of regular
real belief,
right? Yeah, regular going to church. That's and belief would be driving these things,
yeah.
But if they do, it's just sort of like, in the same way that maybe I don't know that you do, but it's like when you sit down at an Italian restaurant and you go, oh, I'm Italian, like they come to church and they go, oh, I'm a Christian.
Yeah, it's totally
like
yeah.
It's like it's sort of like a little bit of a hat tip to heritage, but not anything that has any kind of meaningful impact on their life.
And like my boys claim to be Italian. I'm like, you're not Italian at all. You're like an eighth or something, right?
But they're Italian because you are.
Yeah, and it's like a cultural thing in our family. So they think that's really cool, like kind of thing. But we're never like, man, we're German. No offense to Germany, but it's just
poor,
kind of like,
poor Germany and Sweden.
We do some church planting in New Orleans, and that we partner with, I should say. And so I talk to those pastors and that are down there, and they'll tell you the biggest hindrance to the gospel going forward with an individual in a conversation is generational Catholic heritage. It's like a big barrier because the person might not even have really Catholic beliefs, but the fact that they are Catholic is why they can't really budge or move anywhere in a gospel conversation, is that identity It's not a convictional identity. It's a heritage identity.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So obviously that's a reality in New Orleans, in Tallahassee where we are. It's not generational Catholicism that is the barrier, but maybe just sort of generational Christianity, we'll say. So this is a huge mission field for us, and kind of a huge driving force behind why you planted the church, and who we aim to reach on a regular basis. So what are the opportunities for us missionally as a church to leverage to help push into cultural Christianity, and how does this kind of drive how we think about the mission field where we're located?
Well, I think really low hanging fruit are like our services centered around holidays. So, Easter service, and really we're in a place where, I think where we are in North Florida, you can still get away. Like Easter is still a pretty big deal, but I know other places, that if anything, it's kind of shifting to where Christmas is maybe a little more intentional, like universally, just nationally, I guess we'll say, across the United States. But here I feel like at the bottom of the Bible Belt where you can still get away with, like, Easter is a pretty big cultural holiday. So definitely leveraging holidays to invite people, Easter, Christmas Eve, all that lumped in together, to be able to communicate the gospel to people. And then I think also you have to be sort of keen on, like, what are some of the cultural, like, rhythms and movements where you are. So I think there's, like, a local emphasis too. So just knowing that we have church members who are involved in our city in a lot of different ways. But when I think about Tallahassee, some of the things that, kind of move life in Tallahassee, we have people who are church members and Christians who are involved in all of those spheres. So we've done things like participate in, a springtime Tallahassee, which is like a, kind of parade and festival in our city. And we've done things where, we have people who are involved in, local sports, in Chamber of Commerce things. Those are culturally specific to Tallahassee, but it's important to have your people there because they're going to be the ones who are living as salt and light and building relationships with people who are cultural Christians who need to be reached. So that's kind of disconnected from, like, I think the big things would be, like our Christmas, Easter services, things like that. But just looking for, like, that low hanging fruit of, like, where are people going where we might be able to bring, the gospel into it, whether that's through relationship or through gatherings, for the purpose of being able to share it and kind of meet people where they are.
I see myself locally as guys who's from here, as almost like a pastor to cultural Christianity in town. Even if people have never even walked in the door of our church before, I've done a lot of their weddings. They call me for their parents' funeral, grandma's funeral I never even met before. I mean, things like that. So I look for any way I can to serve as that kind of figure. They're not church members, but, like, serve as that figure to people, because that is my mission field. Like that I really, that's my heartbeat. Is that. And so I just really try to make myself extremely available and try to put myself right smack in the middle of it, of cultural Christianity in our community. So that's a big part of it for me. And then preaching. Like I kind of deconstruct cultural Christianity almost every sermon I preach. People even realize that I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. It's like that was like a lens and angle I come from, is to kind of answer questions that cultural Christians might not be asking but need to be thinking about, to try to create it happening in their head, which a lot of it is our own morality, right? What we think of our own righteousness, and if that's good enough to stand before the holy God they claim to believe in. Right, because without that, I think one of those important questions for cultural Christianity is comes out of Galatians 2, where I think it's verse 21, where Paul asks the question, or makes a statement, I should say, if righteousness can be obtained by keeping the law, then Christ died for nothing. So these cultural Christians that claim to believe in Jesus and would be offended if you suggested they didn't, which I understand that's offensive, they're figuratively screaming that Jesus died for nothing without even realizing it. Because they really think that they're fine and could stand before God on their own as good people who were sincere and meant well and came from Christian families, rather than with the good news of the gospel is standing before God covered in the righteousness of Christ. So they just don't think they need it. They believe that Jesus died on the cross, but, like, that it's actually personal in my place for my sin. It's like they don't really know what that means.
It's not for them in a real sense. Like he did it, but it's in this sort of kind of vague, distant,
it's
far
like a
off
symbolism. Like, I mean, and that's very prevalent in some, like, PCUSA churches, Episcopal churches, where it's just not really preach. There's remnants, of course, but that the cross is, and it's funny because it's really observed during Lent, and they have Good Friday services, and they'll put a black drape over the cross on Good Friday, but like they don't actually preach it. And so the people just don't know. A lot of cultural Christianity is just ignorance. People just don't know.
I was gonna say, I think it's interesting. Like maybe I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the people that I can think of that I know that wear a like cross pendant on a chain, like necklace, most of them are cultural Christians, and so it's like you're carrying around this symbol that essentially you don't actually believe was necessary.
Yeah, good luck, charm Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus take the wheel.
It's the same thing as sort of like a Catholic having a charm with their kind of patron saint or whatever.
Yeah,
it's just kind of interesting to me. And one of the other things that I think I was going to kind of point out that you were talking about, Dean, that is just funny is like there are people where we've been at lunch and they'll say, I don't know, they'll cuss and they'll be like, oops, I shouldn't cuss in front of my pastor. Yeah. And it's like, you haven't been to church in like 5 years. But they call you, and I think that's just a testament to the way that you've talked about kind of living your life in culture and being in the cultural Christianity scene. Like they see you as their pastor, even though that doesn't really mean anything.
I was sitting next to a girl at Kush's, just ran away. I was just eating a bowl of gumbo by myself, and she was like 2 seats away from me. I've known her forever, and I'm never well. Like I don't even have her number, but like we just known each other forever. Right. Like went to middle school together, that kind of thing. And I've reached out to her a few times when she had some tragedies happen in her life and that kind of thing. But she was drinking beer, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, it feels kind of weird drinking in front of my pastor." And I was like, "She's never been to our church ever." Like,
but she
not
calls you
one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit. Kind of, you have to kind of deconstruct cultural Christianity. You have to maybe pose the questions that they're not asking and kind of move them away from either self-righteousness, good works, kind of for morality, and move them to the gospel. And so like really in cultural Christianity, how do we take the gospel to these people? How do we like show them it's, it is for them? Like how do we take how do we create connection between I would be offended if you said that Jesus dying on the cross wasn't necessary, but it not being connected to a faith that's rooted in the fact that Jesus died on the cross for them. Like what are the things that we actually can do to help bridge the gap, and how does the gospel speak to that?
Well, I do think that being a part of a gospel preaching church is essential. Like that has to be there, because how else are people going to consistently hear that message? Maybe you're a cultural, like I would like to meet the cultural Christian who's like, I can't get enough of the Tim Keller sermon podcast. Like, I'd be like, you're probably not a cultural Christian then. Like you might be casual, but to go back to our last conversation. But so I think it has to be, it has to be through like preaching. That's, where people are going to hear the truth. I also think that we have to remember that in the same way that we who are Christians still continue to have moments where God teaches us something, corrects, a wrong belief in us, convicts us, the Spirit is at work in us, that, for the cultural Christian, like that needs to happen in terms of their salvation. Like their eyes need to be opened, And so I think we have to be careful that we don't treat people as projects, right? That we really, truly love people and we are in their lives and we trust for God to do the work, but we can be faithful, carriers of the message. We can be there and love people. We can, we're not here to judge or condemn, but we are here to speak truth. So I think you have to let God do the work that only God can do, and then be a faithful friend and someone who cares enough to tell people the truth, to not let people stay in their lostness and in just kind of their cultural beliefs. But it can be humbling to remember, okay, and reassuring, I think, for like if you have someone in your life who is a cultural Christian and you're just like, man, like when are their eyes going to be open? Like how can I make them see? Well, that you aren't the Holy Spirit. Like only the Holy Spirit can do that work, but you can faithfully be there and try to, whether it's through inviting to church or through meeting regularly or through conversation and like prayer, don't underestimate, like just continuing to ask God to carry out, the work of opening someone's eyes. I think through all of that, you can see amazing things happen.
I think that's great. Yeah. And, like my friend at the Cush's I talked about, like, she just doesn't know. I mean, yeah, she thinks I'm her pastor because she knows, I'm a pastor, right? And then she can talk to me when she wants to, that kind of thing. And so I think one of the best things we can do with cultural Christians is just continue to expose them to the truth, because there's almost like this sort of, that happens when you actually hear the real gospel. Right. That's what it was for me. I was just like, what? I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. And, I can tell you about Easter and about Noah's Ark and about David and Goliath. But when I was told that I was a sinner in need of salvation, that Jesus was the only one that could provide that for me, I mean, I was like, whoa, like what? and I just didn't know. So my issue really wasn't morals or generic God or heritage as much as it was ignorance, where I was at church every Sunday, but I never really heard the gospel. And so, I mean, my youth pastor, like, great guy. I think I appreciate him because he made church fun for me at a time where that was kind of helpful. I think it's good for a youth pastor to make church enjoyable for kids. So I thank him for that, that he was a very positive influence in my life. And I think the world of him to this day as a human being. But he didn't believe Adam and Eve were real people. And he thought that all the Old Testament stories were like myths or allegories or fabrications, or just like they would say, like, kind of classic, that mainline thing is they think that all the stories in the Bible, they're just kind of there to help you think about God and help you think about faith, just kind of generically. So like that's what I grew up in. Yeah. So that's reality.
Yeah. It almost, when Dean, as you were talking, it made me think of Isaiah 6, and, he says, woe of me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips. And then he says a little bit later, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And it's almost like the way to, and Ashlyn, you mentioned this, and I think it's critical, is like, we actually can't do that work, right? Like, we can't get people to see that, but we can keep presenting it and begging the Lord and asking the Lord to reveal that to people, so that hopefully through his grace and his providence, that they would see that they are in the same way that Isaiah was, like, woe is me, I have seen the Lord, and I realize that no longer I can't stand before the Lord on my own righteousness. And so in fact, like, I need somebody to take my guilt away. I need, and it's Jesus in my place. And so the ability to kind of continue to usher that in front of people, I think, is a responsibility that we have.
And I think presence, in the lives of our cultural Christian friends, like, the best cultural Christian ministry that I do, no one ever knows about. It just doesn't show up, on any kind of post. It's just being in people's lives, being connected, going out for that drink together, texting, just like talking sports. I mean, just being there, and then just looking for opportunities. And also, when you're trying to reach cultural Christians, just set yourself up just to be disappointed a lot, because you're going to think they're coming to church with you. You're going to think they're starting, they don't. And it's not personal. It's going to feel personal. It does to me every single time, but like, it's not. That's just not a thing. It's not a category. They don't think it's a bad thing. They think it's such a good thing that they're even going, oh yeah, I'll come. But then it just doesn't happen for whatever reason, or in the same way that we try to make people feel good and tell people what they want to hear sometimes in our human nature, they're doing the same to you at that moment. They don't really want to come, but they know it means a lot to you, and they respect that. But it's just sort of, well, I got my own faith, I'm fine, just not right now. I got a lot going on. You just have to be prepared for that. It's a long game with cultural Christians. It's a long game. I almost see, like, people who straight up know they're not Christians, like, come to faith easier. And that discipleship's a really long game, because they don't know anything. They never heard of John the Baptist. They don't know anything. Like, that's a longer game than the person who knows the stories. That's a tougher one. That's just tough. So so I don't mean to be discouraging. Just be prepared for the long game of it. It really is. It's a lot of disappointment. It could be some hurt feelings. Gonna, be some high moments where you're just fired up and pumped, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, wait, what happened to that when we were at Chick-fil-A and you told me that, like, what? Where do we go from there? Like, to zero?
Yeah, how did we go from there to here?
Yeah, that's just reality. I could tell you so many conversations and stories, relationships. That's reality for me.
Well, and I mean, I think, Dean, talking about the person who knows nothing, and then they come to know the Lord, and they're like, it's a major, kind of long discipleship thing. These people have the mental model for Jesus, and they actually think that they believe in it. And so, like, yeah, it's significantly more difficult to deconstruct something and then reconstruct the right thing in its place than it is to
start from scratch.
To start from a blank slate. So,
totally.
As we think about cultural Christianity. Is there any other kind of final thoughts or things that?
I would just say in some sense, because I know, we've had conversations before, and I think at large people will talk about, like, will cultural Christianity kind of go away as America continues to become more secular and things like that. But I think the thing that's interesting is with how much in our current culture and society, like, we are told, to affirm ourselves and to kind of give yourselves, it's not actual Christian grace, but it's basically just like leeway or like a pass, like you be you, it's just don't be too hard on yourself, whatever. And we should be like kind and gentle with ourselves. But I think that if the cultural Christian doesn't, because when you were talking about, the person who truly comes to saving faith and is immediately like moved to worship, right? Like that's like the response. It's like, I was lost and now I'm found. I was blind and now I see. The cultural Christian is thinking like, I'm okay, I could be better.
Sure.
And then culture at large is telling you, you're good. Don't try too hard. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't feel like you have to live up to these standards. It's in a weird way reinforcing some of the moral postures that I think cultural Christians take in like a really lukewarm, lazy sense. And so
that's a great observation.
I just think that is going to be an interesting challenge, and if anything, an encouragement not to abandon the urgency towards reaching cultural Christians, because culture is going to continue to work, and Satan is going to continue to work to pull people away from the truth of Jesus Christ. And so whatever is happening in the culture at large, we need to remember that people are always going to be in need of hearing the gospel. And so we just kind of work within that.
It's well said. Any final thoughts?
No, just shout out to Pat Scott and producer Jacob.
As we close and transition into the local on tap, sticking with this theme of culture, what are some cultural hotspots in Tallahassee?
Ooh.
What are places that
Culture.
share and build culture in our city? I'll start. So one of the things, like, I think I don't know when we talked about this. Somebody said something about I think it was Jacob last episode, talking about being like not for festivals, but like he's like pro them in theory, but like not actually. I don't know if this counts as a festival, but like things like Cush's crawfish ball
Saturday,
like
the Saturday after you listen to this,
or
before you listen to this podcast,
like those are things that like are these sort of like standing things that kind of we rally around, and where culture is shaped and shared, not so much in the sense of like a board meeting or a city hall movement, but like where life happens. And some of those, especially as we think about combating cultural Christianity, where we can be seen as sort of like normal people amongst, like, I don't know, convictional Christians seen as normal people, just participating in the life of the city. I think those kind of festivities are really helpful in shaping culture in our city.
So this does not sound like your classic kind of cultural thing, but to me, it's where life really happens in Tallahassee. And for a lot of people in different demographics, I'm going to say like the kids rec fields for local sports. You want to have conversations. You want to be standing next to the CEO of this and the all the way to, all over the map. That is a place where this life happens. More conversations. I would also add that to like high school baseball games, anything where local kids are doing something that parents are drawn to or are going to be at. Just so much of that is happening there. I mean, like tons of it. And I would also say like our local restaurant scene, I think, is an important place for it as well. I think our food scene is getting better and better here, in terms of just what we have to offer for being not a huge city, So I think a lot of just, I think it's a big part of a city's culture is their food. Like if we like named a city and said we're going like some unknown city and said let's go here, one of the main things on our itinerary would be food, like what restaurants you're going to go to and those kind of things. So I'm not trying to say we're New York City, obviously, but like we're really improving a lot. And I think a lot of culture is happening there through that.
Cool Beans dessert, James Beard nominated pastry chef.
Let's go.
So
yeah.
The pastry chef at Cool Beans was nominated for a James Beard Award, I think like a year or two ago.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
I love that. And then I'd throw in and be our local politics. That's a major part of our city's culture. Many people are employed by government here. A lot of good things come from that. So I would say that, like, especially during session in this town, the culture of downtown Tallahassee, a lot of culture is made there, live there, and it's actually kind of a neat thing to be a part of. You kind of go out at lunchtime and just kind of walk around for a minute. You're going to see just all kind of bustling in Tallahassee from being kind of a sleepy town outside of campus the rest of the year. When session's in play, it's really full speed ahead. Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue into my cultural spot, which is to hit on the museums of Tallahassee.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
So in college, I volunteered at the Museum of Florida History, which is fantastic. And then, and it's like accessible, like it's doable. You know, it's not huge. So even if you have little kids, it's like interactive, it's not overwhelming. The Historic Capitol Museum, I do want to give a shout out to that. And to your point, Dean, we did projects when I was there of like oral history, like kind of capturing from like former like legislators and things like that, people who would come in. And that was just like cool to hear kind of the stories of Florida, you know? So shout out to that. The Grove Museum too is like great Tallahassee and Florida history, the old Leroy Collins, Governor Mansion. And then the other thing, oh gosh, I'm like full of things. The Lemoyne Chain of Parks Art Festival. I always get the name wrong.
We have church members of Breenans who are very involved in that.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of arts and culture, like that's a fantastic opportunity to get like local art, to see, kind of Southern artistic culture. And I think that's awesome. Also, my fun one, I don't do this very often, but occasionally my sister and I will go to like, Tallahassee has some like niche local theater offerings, and we will go either to like the Little Theater or even branching out as far as like the Quincy Music Theater.
Whoa, too far. Literally and figuratively, too far.
I love me like a local
theater production,
like a local musical. Like it is just fun. So yes,
let's throw in 7 days. Opening nights, which brings a lot of art, a lot of good music to us. I've been to several of those. Mm-hmm. Also, I would like to mention a great culture shaping place, 550 East Tennessee Street.
I was waiting
the
for
Grand
it.
Old School on the Hill of Leon High School. So,
which like does have pretty strong arts and
yes, it does,
scene,
which has
right?
hurt our football program. But yes, but that would be one for sure. And then another thing that came to mind, just because it's such a cultural thing in town, is Florida State football.
Yeah, for sure.
I was gonna say
that's a big part of Tallahassee culture. I mean, that's its own culture in itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Both college campuses, really. I mean, I'm sure FAMU. Yes. Sorry, my bad. TCC.
So I think that's got to be on there too. And I'd say another one I want to throw out there: allergies.
Yeah, allergies.
Okay.
#COVID.
Another one I want to throw out there is just everything that is the Marching 100.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
In our city, just like what it means to a lot of people in Tallahassee, and FAMU homecoming too.
Oh yeah,
that's not my context personally. I didn't go to FAMU. I don't have family that went to FAMU. It's I just, but like, it's
FAMU
just,
homecoming absolutely shapes.
It's
the
oh
culture
my gosh,
of the city.
it's the amount of people it brings to town, the festivities that it is.
Yes.
I've never been before. I've been to FAMU football games. I've never been to homecoming before, but like it is a thing, and not just a game. But the game's probably the least of it.
Yeah.
It's everything else that goes with it.
Yeah.
Like celebrities come to town, all kind of stuff. I'm hoping it hasn't still fully taken off yet. But I'm hoping the Word of South Festival can really become a thing.
Yeah, it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, because we really do. I don't know where the money's coming from. We bring in like real authors, real things going on. Like Chrissy, my wife Chrissy, went and heard Rick Bragg, the great Southern writer, who writes on the back cover of Southern Living, has written several books that are bestsellers. She went and heard him present. It's cool. She loves Rick Bragg. So that would be neat if that. I haven't seen a schedule yet for this year. I think we're doing it again. We had to cancel last year because of everything, but I think it's happening in April this year, and I haven't seen.
I think John Paul White from the Civil Wars had a concert there last.
That's right.
Couple years
Lisa
ago.
Loeb.
Yeah, I mean, there's some,
but there's some like major writers
serious,
though. But it's musicians, it's authors, it's. Yeah, I hope that can really become a thing and people can get behind it.
Is that your annual trip to Cascades Park?
That's my annual trip to Cascades Park. Yeah, that is. That's right.
So, if you don't know that reference, I think that was from last episode. You can go back and listen.
Yeah, Cascades Park, also home to Centennial Field, where Leon played their football games back in the 30s and 40s.
Shaping a lot of culture at 550
baby.
East,
the ticket booth's still there.
Cool.
It's history.
All right. Well, hope you've enjoyed this episode as we talk about cultural Christianity, and we will see you next week as we tackle leveraging holidays for mission. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to The Local Dive, a podcast diving into deep and shallow musings about Christ, the church, and culture. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow The Local Dive on social media and continue the conversation with us on Instagram and Twitter at The Local Dive Pod.